Hey, welcome back to World History. This is day 14, 14b. We were talking about specifically Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in ancient India. Now, scholars have some mystery elements about the ancient civilizations of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit later in the lecture. But we do know that before 2500 BC, over 2,000 years before Christ, there was a civilization in the Indus River Valley. People were living and moving and having their being. And what do we know about the beginning of this civilization? Well, go ahead and write these down. And if I go forward too quickly for writing, please pause the lecture before you continue so you can get these notes. These are pretty interesting. You might see a Minecraft reference in some of the raw materials that they valued in the Indus River Valley. So trade networks linked the cities around the Indus River Valley, as you'll find with all the ancient civilizations. And in that way, they could communicate with cultures in their region while also sourcing materials that they couldn't get nearby through trade. And materials that they would source from different regions of the Indus River Valley were lapis lazuli, that brilliant blue stone, and other materials for bead making and for trading, for expressing wealth. They domesticated different crops that included peas, sesame seeds, dates, the fruit, and cotton. And they trained the water buffalo to work for them in their farming. They used mud bricks that would dry in the sun to make their buildings. And then a little bit later on, they had many cities along the Indus River. And there were some tributaries that they also built settlements around. And of course, they used irrigation, as all early civilizations do. And they used irrigation to help them form mud from the clay and then let that dry in the sun, and then that would be their building material. This photo here helps us to travel to the Indus River Valley. And we can see there's a high western mound made up of a massive mud brick platform and brick houses. So they kind of built them up onto this platform. And later on, when Buddhism came to India after Hinduism, some Buddhist worshippers used a stupa up here in their worship in the early AD. So once again, to see the map, the Indus River Valley, a few notes on this page for us. The four major cities are there, and we're talking especially about Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro because of the recent excavation that's been done. Now, this may remind you of Mesopotamia, that the river flooded unpredictably, and even more unpredictably than Mesopotamia, because in Mesopotamia, they didn't know when it was going to flood, but they knew that every so often it would, basically enough to sustain a large population without having to move away because of an endless drought. Not so in the Indus River Valley. They may have experienced some endless droughts, and they may have even moved away because of that. They also had to face strong winds, and when the rains did come, they would last for many weeks and sometimes threaten those mud buildings with the monsoon season. They were protected from inclement weather and invasions to the north by the Himalayan mountains. The major cities were Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. We have an artist rendering of what that city life might have looked like behind on this slide. Both these cities had a well-planned grid pattern, which New York City has that today, Lincoln, Nebraska, to a certain extent, Austin. Whenever you have a city that has 6th Street, 5th Street, 12th Street, and you can kind of go in order, there's some kind of a planned grid pattern going on there. So this was very advanced and smart and good for navigation for that civilization. They even used standard sized bricks, which kept their buildings looking nice and having a good solid structure to them. So they would use like brick molds to make sure their bricks were the same size and weight, and you can see how that would add to the structure's stability. And they had extensive plumbing systems. According to historians, the oldest toilets